I found a locked box with a key in my late husband's workshop with a note that said, "Open it on your 70th birthday. Today is that day." Inside, there was a message: "Follow the instructions and don't tell your children anything." I did as it said. What I discovered still gives me chills. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I woke on the morning of my 70th birthday to find frost covering the windows of our farmhouse like lace curtains made of ice. October in rural Pennsylvania always arrived with a sharp bite, but this particular morning felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My husband Gerald had been dead for 3 years. 3 years of silence in a house that once rang with his laughter. 3 years of sleeping alone in a bed built for two. 3 years of pretending I was fine when our sons called once a month to ask if I needed anything. They never stayed long enough to hear the real answer. I made my coffee the way I always did, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table where Gerald used to read his morning paper. That's when I saw it. A small brass key lying on top of yesterday's mail, catching the pale sunlight that filtered through the frost. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. It was old, ornate, with an elaborate G etched into its bow. My heart began to hammer in my chest. I knew this key. Or rather, I knew of it. Gerald had worn it on a chain around his neck for the last 5 years of his life, tucking it beneath his shirt whenever I asked about it. "Just a bit of sentimental nonsense," he'd say with that crooked smile of his. "Nothing for you to worry about, Maria." He'd stopped calling me by my first name, Aretha, decades ago, preferring the middle name he said suited me better. But Gerald never did anything without reason. And he certainly wouldn't have left something on my kitchen table by accident, not 3 years after his death. I searched the envelope pile frantically, looking for a note, an explanation, anything. Then I saw it. A small cream-colored card tucked between the electric bill and a grocery store circular. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The handwriting was unmistakably Gerald's, that careful, measured script he'd learned in Catholic school 70-some years ago. "My dearest Maria, if you're reading this, then you've made it to 70, just like I always knew you would. Happy birthday, my love. I need you to go to my workshop. There's a locked box on the 3rd shelf behind the paint cans. This key will open it. What's inside is for you and you alone. One more thing. Don't tell the boys. Not yet. You'll understand why soon enough. All my love, forever and always, Gerald." My coffee went cold as I sat there staring at those words. Don't tell the boys. Gerald adored our sons, Stephen and Thomas. He'd worked himself to the bone to give them everything. College educations, seed money for their businesses, a childhood full of security and love. Why would he want me to keep secrets from them? I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and made my way to the workshop, a converted barn about 50 yards from the main house. Gerald had spent countless hours out here, tinkering with machinery, building furniture, working on projects he never quite explained. I'd respected his space, just as he'd respected my garden and my pottery studio. The workshop smelled of sawdust and motor oil, scents so distinctly Gerald that for a moment I could almost believe he was still here, bent over his workbench, safety glasses perched on his nose. I climbed the stepladder carefully. My knees weren't what they used to be, and found the paint cans exactly where he'd said they'd be. Behind them sat a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, its surface carved with intricate patterns of roses and lavender. My breath caught. Those had been my wedding flowers, the ones Gerald brought me every anniversary without fail for 47 years. The key slid into the lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty workshop. Inside, I found a rolled-up paper, a sealed envelope, and a small leather journal I'd never seen before. I unrolled the paper first. It was a map, hand-drawn, detailed, showing our property and the surrounding area. Someone had marked a path in red ink, starting from our back 40 and leading to the eastern edge of the property line, where Gerald's family land met the old Morrison farm. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with more of Gerald's handwriting. "Maria, follow the map to the red X. Go alone, go today. Trust me one more time. The journal will explain everything, but only after you've seen what I've left for you. Remember, Don't ask the children. They wouldn't understand. Not yet. Gee. My hands were shaking now, badly enough that I nearly dropped the journal. I wanted to open it, to devour whatever secrets lay inside, but Gerald's instructions were clear. Only after you've seen what I've left for you. I looked at the map again, tracing the path with my finger. It led through woods I hadn't walked in years, past the creek where our boys used to catch crayfish, toward a part of the property I'd always assumed was just wild forest and brambles. Something cold slithered down my spine. Gerald had been planning this for years. That much was obvious. But why? And why keep it from Stephen and Thomas? I thought about calling them, about asking them to come over and help me investigate whatever strange treasure hunt my dead husband had arranged. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the urgency in Gerald's handwriting. Maybe it was the way he'd hidden that key for 3 years, ensuring I'd find it only on this specific day. Or maybe it was simply that after 50 years of marriage, I still trusted him more than anyone else in the world. I folded the map carefully and slipped it into my pocket along with the journal. The October wind had picked up, rattling the workshop windows, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. I'd need to hurry if I wanted to make this journey before the weather turned. As I stepped out of the workshop, my phone buzzed in my cardigan pocket. A text from Stephen. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry we can't make it today. Busy with the Henderson merger. We'll take you to dinner next week. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then tucked the phone away without responding. My sons were good men. Successful, intelligent, devoted to their families and their careers. But they'd grown distant over the years. Their visits shorter, their conversations more perfunctory. They saw me as their aging mother who needed occasional checking on, not as a person with my own mysteries to solve. Maybe that's what Gerald had understood. Maybe that's why his note had been so insistent. Don't ask the children. I gathered supplies for my walk, a flashlight, a bottle of water, my walking stick, and set out across the back 40. The grass was still wet with morning dew, soaking through my shoes, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing with possibilities, each one stranger than the last. The path through the woods was overgrown but still visible, as if someone had walked it regularly until recently. I followed the map's directions, turning left at the lightning-struck oak, crossing the creek at the narrow point where flat stones formed a natural bridge, climbing the gentle slope toward the property line. And then I saw it. A gate. A brand-new wrought-iron gate, its posts anchored in fresh concrete, its surface gleaming despite the autumn gloom. And mounted on the gate, a wooden sign with letters burned into the wood in Gerald's distinctive hand. The Valley of Maria. My vision blurred with tears. Maria. My middle name, the name Gerald had loved, the name he'd whispered in my ear on our wedding night and every night after for nearly 50 years. I pushed the gate open. It swung soundlessly on well-oiled hinges, and stepped through. What I saw on the other side made my knees buckle. A farm. A small, perfect farm spread out before me like something from a dream. Acres of lavender stretched in neat purple rows, their fragrance still lingering despite the lateness of the season. Rose bushes lined gravel pathways, their autumn blooms defiant against the cold. And gardenias, my God, gardenias, grew in carefully tended beds around a small wooden cabin that sat in the center of it all. Lavender, roses, gardenias, the exact flowers Gerald had brought me every anniversary. I walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The irrigation system hummed quietly, its pipes running beneath raised beds filled with rich, dark soil. Someone had been caring for this place, maintaining it, keeping it alive. But who? The cabin door was unlocked. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs. Gerald and me on our wedding day, Stephen and Thomas as children, family vacations and Christmas mornings and ordinary moments transformed into treasure by time and loss. A fire was laid in the small wood stove, ready to be lit. Fresh linens covered the narrow bed, and on the table, another envelope. My hands trembled so badly I could barely open it. Inside was a letter, several pages long, in Gerald's careful script. My dearest Maria, if you're reading this, then everything worked according to plan. Welcome to your valley. 5 years ago, I got the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months. I made it 3 years by sheer stubbornness and the grace of God. But I knew my time was running short. And I knew I needed to leave you something more than life insurance and a paid-off mortgage. You spent 50 years taking care of me, taking care of our boys, taking care of everyone but yourself. You gave up your dreams of opening a flower shop. You set aside your pottery to work the farm with me. You made our house a home and our life a joy. So I built you this. I spent every spare hour for 3 years creating a place where you could finally do what you'd always dreamed of: grow beautiful things, create art, have space to breathe and think and simply be yourself. But here's the thing, my love. I couldn't tell you while I was alive, and I'm asking you not to tell the boys. Not yet, because I need you to do something first. The letter ended there, mid-thought, as if Gerald had been interrupted. But there was more. I could feel the weight of additional pages in the envelope. I pulled them out, my heart pounding, and found a completely different kind of document. Legal papers. A deed. A transfer of ownership document dated 2 weeks before Gerald's death. And the property wasn't registered to me. It was registered to someone named Helena Morrison. I read the name 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. But no. There it was in black and white. Notarized and official. Helena Morrison, owner of the Valley of Maria. I didn't know any Helena Morrison. The Morrison farm next door had been abandoned for 20 years, ever since old Frank Morrison died, and his children scattered to the cities. Who was this woman, and why did she own the farm my husband had supposedly built for me? My mind spun with questions, but one thought rose above all the others, sharp and cold and terrible. Gerald had been keeping secrets. Big ones. And the deeper I dug, the more certain I became that his gift wasn't what it seemed. Outside the cabin window, the lavender swayed in the wind, beautiful and innocent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something dark and complicated, something that had been hidden for years, something that was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and myself. I picked up the leather journal with shaking hands and opened to the first page. January 15th, 2018. Met with Helena today. She's agreed to the arrangement, though she's worried about the legal implications. I assured her everything would be handled properly. Maria must never know. Not about Helena, not about the money, and especially not about what I'm really protecting her from. The boys would never understand. They'd see only dollar signs and wasted opportunity. But this is bigger than money. This is about keeping Maria safe. From what, she'll discover soon enough. God forgive me for the secrets I'm taking to my grave. The journal slipped from my fingers and hit the cabin floor with a thud that sounded like a gunshot in the terrible silence. What had Gerald done? And who, or what, was he protecting me from? The journal slipped from my fingers and hit the cabin floor with a thud that sounded like a gunshot in the terrible silence. What had Gerald done? And who, or what, was he protecting me from? I spent 2 hours in that cabin, reading Gerald's journal by the pale afternoon light that filtered through the windows. Each entry revealed another layer of deception, another carefully constructed lie. My husband, my kind, honest, straightforward husband, had been living a double life for the last 5 years of his existence. Helena Morrison wasn't a stranger. She was Frank Morrison's granddaughter, the one who'd moved to Philadelphia after college and never looked back. According to Gerald's entries, she'd returned to town 4 years ago, broke and desperate after a divorce that had left her with nothing. Gerald had hired her to help build the farm, paying her in cash and providing her a place to stay in the old Morrison farmhouse. But that wasn't the worst of it. March 3rd, 2018. Helena found the documents today while cleaning out Frank's old office. She knows about the mineral rights now. She knows what Thomas and Stephen have been planning. I had to tell her everything. About the geological survey, about the boys' investment opportunity, about why I need to protect this land. She's frightened. She should be. If the boys discover what Frank found beneath this property 40 years ago, they'll tear it all apart. They'll tear Maria apart in the process. I've made Helena the legal owner on paper. It's the only way to keep the land out of probate. out of the boy's reach until Maria is ready to understand what's really at stake. Mineral rights, geological surveys. My son's planning something behind my back. I felt sick. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, the confused ramblings of a dying man. But Gerald had been sharp until the very end, his mind clear even when his body was failing. And the legal documents were real, dated and notarized, transferring ownership of these 15 acres to a woman I'd never met. I gathered the papers and the journal, my hands steadier now despite the fury building in my chest. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. The Morrison farmhouse sat just beyond the tree line, a weathered Victorian that had seen better days. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. I marched up the creaking porch steps and knocked, harder than I'd intended. The woman who answered was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40, with tired eyes and paint-stained fingers. She took one look at me, and her face went pale. "Mrs. Fletcher," she whispered. "Oh God, it's your birthday. You're Helena Morrison." It wasn't a question. She nodded slowly, stepping back from the door. "Please come in. I've been dreading this conversation for 3 years." The inside of the farmhouse was surprisingly cozy, renovated, clearly lived in, filled with the warm smell of baking bread. Helena led me to a kitchen table covered in architectural drawings and gestured for me to sit. "Your husband was a good man," she said quietly, pouring tea I hadn't asked for. "He saved my life when I had nowhere else to go, but he put me in an impossible position. Then helped me out of mine," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. "Explain why you own the farm my husband supposedly built for me. Explain what he meant about protecting me from my own sons." Helena's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "How much of the journal have you read?" "Enough to know my husband was keeping secrets. Enough to know you're involved. Start talking." She took a deep breath. "5 years ago, your husband came to me with a proposition. He said he was dying and needed to secure certain assets outside of his estate. He offered me money, a lot of money, to act as the legal owner of the land he was developing. The Valley of Maria. Why?" The word came out like a whip crack. "Because he discovered something. About your sons. About their business dealings." Helena pulled a folder from beneath the architectural drawings. "These are copies. Gerald made me promise to give them to you if something went wrong. If you came here before." "Before what?" "Before Thomas and Stephen showed their hand." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, emails, text message transcripts. I recognized Stephen's email address, Thomas's phone number. The messages were dated from 3 years ago, right around the time Gerald died. Thomas to Stephen, March 15th, 2022. "Dad's not going to last much longer. Once he's gone, we need to move fast on the Morrison property. The geological survey confirms rare earth minerals. We're talking tens of millions if we can get Mom to sell." Stephen to Thomas, March 18th, 2022. "She'll fight us on it. You know how sentimental she is about the farm. We'll need to convince her it's for her own good. Nursing home care is expensive. We'll frame it as financial security." Thomas to Stephen, March 20th, 2022. "Whatever it takes. The Chinese mining company is ready to move as soon as we secure the mineral rights. This is our retirement, Stephen. We can't let Mom's nostalgia ruin this opportunity." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My sons, my boys, whom I'd raised to be honest and kind and good. They'd been planning to manipulate me into selling land I didn't even know was valuable, planning to warehouse me in a nursing home, planning to profit from my grief. "There's more," Helena said softly. She pulled out another document, a letter from a law firm in Philadelphia. 6 months ago, Thomas hired a lawyer to begin competency proceedings. They were preparing to have you declared mentally unfit to make financial decisions. The room spun. "That's impossible. I'm perfectly healthy. I manage all my own affairs." They were going to manufacture evidence. Doctors' reports, testimony from concerned neighbors, fabricated incidents of confusion or memory loss. Gerald found out about it 2 weeks before he died. That's when he created the trust. "What trust?" Helena's expression was grim. "The Valley of Maria isn't just a farm, Mrs. Fletcher. It's a legal entity. an irrevocable trust with you as the beneficiary and me as the trustee. Gerald transferred the mineral rights to the trust along with the surface land. The terms are ironclad. The property cannot be sold, subdivided, or developed for commercial purposes during your lifetime. After your death, it passes to a conservation organization, not to your sons. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Gerald had known. He'd known his own sons were planning to betray me, and he'd spent his final years building a fortress of legal protection I didn't even know existed. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. He was afraid, Helena said simply. Afraid you wouldn't believe him. Afraid it would destroy your relationship with your sons. He hoped that if he kept you safe without you knowing why, maybe things would blow over. Maybe Thomas and Stephen would give up their scheme. But they haven't. No. They've been circling like sharks. They visited me 3 times in the last year, offering to buy the property, threatening to sue, trying to find any legal loophole they can exploit. They don't know about the trust yet. Gerald structured it so carefully that it won't show up in standard property records, but it's only a matter of time before they dig deeper. A phone rang. Helena's cell, buzzing on the counter. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. It's your son, Stephen. He's called 4 times today already. My blood ran cold. Don't answer it. But even as I said it, I heard the sound of a car engine outside. Tires on gravel. A car door slamming. Helena rushed to the window. It's them, both of them. Mrs. Fletcher, they can't know you're here. If they realize you found out, I'll handle my sons. I stood, my legs steadier than I'd expected. 50 years of motherhood had taught me how to face difficult situations with grace. But as I moved toward the door, Helena grabbed my arm. Wait, there's something else. Something Gerald discovered right before he died. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The mineral survey your sons commissioned? It wasn't the first one. Frank Morrison did one 40 years ago, right before he died. And according to his notes, the rare earth deposits aren't where Thomas and Stephen think they are. What are you saying? I'm saying your sons are chasing fool's gold. The real mineral deposits are under the old farmhouse, this house, not under the valley. Gerald knew it. He let them believe the deposits were on the valley property to keep them focused there while he secured what really mattered. The knock on the door was sharp and impatient. Stephen's voice called out, Helena, we need to talk. Now. I looked at the back door, calculating. I could slip out, avoid the confrontation, buy myself time to think. But something in me had shifted during that hour in the cabin. Reading Gerald's desperate attempts to protect me from my own children, I was done running. Done being the sweet, accommodating mother who never questioned or challenged. Mrs. Fletcher, Helena whispered urgently, please, go out the back, if they see you. But I was already walking to the front door, Gerald's journal clutched in my hand like a weapon. I opened it before Stephen could knock again. My sons stood on the porch, dressed in their expensive suits, looking so much like their father it made my heart ache. But their eyes were cold, calculating. These weren't the boys I'd raised. These were strangers wearing familiar faces. Mom? Thomas recovered first, his surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. My voice was calm, steady. It's my birthday, boys. Shouldn't you be taking me to dinner? Stephen's jaw tightened. We texted you, said we'd take you next week. We have business to attend to today. With Ms. Morrison? I stepped aside so they could see Helena standing in the kitchen, her face pale but defiant. What kind of business would that be? The brothers exchanged a glance. Quick, worried. Thomas attempted his courtroom voice, the one he used to intimidate opposing counsel. Mom, this is complicated. Property matters that don't concern you. Why don't you head home and we'll explain everything later? No. The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. I saw shock flicker across both their faces. Their mother, sweet, accommodating Aretha, had never told them no. Not when they wanted to skip church as teenagers. Not when they asked for money for their businesses. Not when they forgot my birthday or canceled Christmas, or went months without calling. I'd never told them no, because I'd loved them too much to risk their rejection. But standing there with Gerald's journal in my hand, with proof of their betrayal spelled out in black and white, I realized something Gerald had known all along. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's just fear dressed up pretty. I know about the mineral rights, I said quietly. I know about the competency proceedings. I know about the Chinese mining company and your plans for my land. Stephen's face flushed red. Mom, that's not... We weren't... Don't lie to me. My voice was steel now. Your father knew what you were planning. He spent his final years making sure you couldn't hurt me. Thomas stepped forward, his expression hardening. Dad was sick, confused. Whatever he told you, he told me nothing. He left me evidence. I held up the journal. 5 years of entries detailing your schemes, your manipulation, your greed. He documented everything. The brothers looked at each other again, and this time I saw something that chilled me to the bone. They weren't surprised. They weren't ashamed. They were angry, furious that their plan had been discovered, that their dying father had outmaneuvered them. Where's the original deed to the Morrison property? Stephen asked, his voice tight. The one Dad signed over to her? He jerked his chin at Helena. Safe, Helena said, along with the trust documents and the real geological survey. There is no trust, Thomas snapped. We've checked every database. This property is held in your name alone, Ms. Morrison, which means it's subject to standard property law. We can force a sale through eminent domain if necessary. The mining company has connections with the state. Try it, I said softly. And I'll take every document your father left me to the local newspaper, to the state attorney general, to anyone who'll listen. Do you really want the world to know you were planning to declare your own mother incompetent so you could steal her land? The silence that followed was terrible and profound. Finally, Stephen spoke, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. You're making a mistake, Mom. A big one. That land is worth millions. We could all be set for life. I am set for life. Your father made sure of that. With what? A flower farm? Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're 70 years old. You can't manage a property like that. You'll run it into the ground within a year, and then what? You'll be broke and alone and too proud to ask for help. The words were designed to hurt, to make me doubt myself. And maybe, 3 years ago, they would have worked. But I'd spent the morning walking through a valley my husband had built with his own dying hands. I'd touched the lavender he'd planted, seen the photographs he'd hung, read the words he'd written with love in every line. Gerald had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Get off this property, I said quietly. Both of you. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize. Mom? Stephen started, but I cut him off. I mean it. You're not welcome in my home. You're not welcome on my land. And if you try to pursue this mining scheme, I will fight you with every resource your father left me. I turned and walked back into Helena's kitchen, closing the door firmly behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the counter to stay upright. Through the window, I watched my sons stand on the porch for a long moment, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. Then they turned and stalked back to Stephen's BMW, tires spitting gravel as they peeled out of the driveway. Helena touched my shoulder gently. That was brave. That was terrifying, I admitted. They'll be back. With lawyers, with doctors, with whatever weapons they can find. Yes, Helena agreed. But now you know what you're fighting for. And you're not alone. I looked at her. This stranger who'd become an unwitting guardian, this woman my husband had trusted with his final secret. Why did you agree to help him? You could have walked away. Helena's eyes filled with tears. Because he reminded me of my grandfather. Because he was dying and desperate and trying to protect someone he loved. Because... She hesitated. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by family. To have people you trust try to take everything from you. I understood then. Gerald hadn't just been protecting me. He'd been saving Helena too, giving her purpose and a home, and a reason to rebuild her life. We sat together in the failing afternoon light, two women bound by a dead man's final act of love, knowing the real battle was just beginning. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and somewhere in town, my sons were regrouping, planning their next move. But I had Gerald's journal. I had Helena's testimony. And I had something more valuable than either. I had finally stopped being afraid of disappointing my children. The war was coming. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight. Part 3. The Turning Point. The call came at 6 the next morning, jolting me from the first real sleep I'd had in 36 hours. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, my heart already racing. Mrs. Fletcher? The voice was crisp, professional, female. This is Dr. Ellen Kern from Riverside Psychiatric Associates. I'm calling to schedule an evaluation appointment for you. Your sons have expressed some concerns about your recent behavior. I hung up before she could finish. My hands were shaking as I set the phone on the nightstand. They'd moved fast, faster than I'd anticipated. It hadn't even been 24 hours since our confrontation at Helena's house, and already they were executing their plan. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, and another. By 7 a.m., I'd received 6 calls from different doctors' offices, 2 from law firms, and 1 from a woman claiming to be from Adult Protective Services. The messages were all variations on the same theme. Concerns about my mental state, my ability to care for myself, my increasingly erratic behavior. My sons were building their case, and they were doing it systematically. I made coffee with trembling hands and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd found Gerald's key just yesterday. Was it really only yesterday? It felt like a lifetime ago. The knock on my door came at 8 o'clock sharp. Through the window, I saw a sheriff's deputy standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. I knew him. Danny Morrison, Helena's cousin, a boy I'd watched grow up in these hills. He'd eaten at my table more times than I could count. I opened the door. Danny. Mrs. Fletcher. He couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I've been asked to conduct a wellness check. Your sons called the station, said they're worried about you. Said you've been acting strange, might be a danger to yourself. Do I look like I'm in danger, Danny? He finally looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his young face. No, ma'am. You look fine. But I have to file a report. It's procedure. Of course. Come in. Would you like coffee? I saw relief wash over him as I stepped aside. He followed me into the kitchen, accepting the coffee mug I offered, clearly grateful this wasn't going to be difficult. Ma'am, I have to ask some standard questions. Do you know what day it is? Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. And where are you? My home, on Fletcher Farm Road, 3 miles outside of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. He relaxed slightly, checking boxes on his form. Your sons mentioned you were seen at the Morrison property yesterday, acting agitated. I was visiting Helena Morrison. We're friends. The lie came easily. I was perfectly calm. They also said you made some accusations. About them trying to take your property. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Danny, did your cousin Helena ever tell you about the arrangement she has with my late husband? His expression shuddered immediately. Ma'am, I'm not asking you to violate any confidences. I'm asking you to use common sense. Do you really think I'm incompetent? Or do you think my sons are trying to manipulate the system? Danny Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Helena told me what your husband did for her. Told me about the trust. Told me your sons have been pressuring her to sell. He looked up, his eyes hard. For what it's worth, Mrs. Fletcher, I think your sons are pieces of work. But that doesn't change the fact that they're building a paper trail. This wellness check goes in the system. If they get enough of these, if they get doctors to sign off on evaluations, they can have me declared incompetent. Yes, ma'am, I've seen it happen before. Adult children who want control of their parents' assets. It's more common than you'd think. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the October morning. What can I do? Get ahead of it. See your own doctor. Get your own evaluation. Document that you're of sound mind. And ma'am, he hesitated, get yourself a lawyer. A good one. Because this is just the opening salvo. After Danny left, I sat alone in my kitchen and let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. My sons, my babies, the children I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares and heartbreaks, were systematically trying to destroy my life. And they were doing it legally, carefully, with the kind of cold calculation that suggested they'd been planning this for far longer than I'd imagined. I thought about calling someone. My sister in Florida. My old friend Margaret from church. But what would I say? My sons are trying to have me committed so they can steal my land? It sounded insane, even in my own head. The phone rang again. This time I answered. Mom. Stephen's voice was smooth, conciliatory. I think we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Please, just hear me out. Yesterday got heated. Things were said that shouldn't have been said. But we're family, Mom. We need to work this out. I said nothing, waiting. Thomas and I have been talking. We were wrong to approach this the way we did. We should have included you from the beginning. He paused. We'd like to take you to lunch today. Clear the air. Discuss everything openly. Every instinct screamed trap, but I thought about Danny's warning, about the paper trail my sons were building. If I refused to meet with them, refused to communicate, it would just feed their narrative that I was unstable, paranoid, incapable of rational discussion. Fine. Noon. The diner in town. Public place. Perfect. We'll see you then. He hung up before I could change my mind. I had 4 hours to prepare. 4 hours to figure out how to face my sons without revealing just how much I knew, without showing them the full contents of Gerald's journal. I drove to Helena's house, taking the back roads to avoid being seen. She answered the door looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. They called you too, I said. It wasn't a question. 6 times. Different lawyers, all asking the same questions. Whether I'd witnessed any signs of dementia or confusion. Whether you seemed to understand the financial arrangements Gerald made. She pulled me inside quickly, checking the road behind me. They're trying to establish that you weren't mentally competent when Gerald created the trust. Can they do that? They can try. If they can prove Gerald was taking advantage of your diminished capacity, they might be able to invalidate the trust. Helena's hands twisted together nervously. Mrs. Fletcher, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you yesterday because I was hoping it wouldn't matter. My stomach dropped. What? The trust documents. The originals. Gerald gave them to someone for safekeeping. Someone he said you could trust absolutely. She met my eyes. But I don't know who. He never told me. He said when the time was right they'd come forward. That's impossible. Gerald wouldn't leave something that important with a stranger. He didn't. That's the thing. In his journal, he called this person the witness. Someone who'd known him for years. Someone who understood why he was doing this. Helena pulled out her copy of Gerald's journal, flipping to a page she'd marked. Here, 3 weeks before he died. I read the entry, my blood running cold. April 2nd, 2022. Gave the originals to the witness today. Felt like handing over my life's last work. But I trust this person completely. They know what's at stake. They'll come forward when Maria needs them, but only when she's ready. Only when she's strong enough to face the full truth. I haven't told Maria about the witness. She'd demand to know who, and I can't risk anyone finding out. Not even her. The boys are too smart, too ruthless. If they knew who held the real power, they'd find a way to get to them. Forgive me, my love. One more secret. One more protection. But this one might save everything. Who? I whispered. Who did he trust that much? Helena shook her head helplessly. He never said. Not in the journal. Not in any of the documents. It's like he wanted to make sure no one could force the information out of him. I thought frantically through Gerald's life, his friends, his connections. His lawyer was dead. Passed away 6 months after Gerald. His doctor had retired and moved to Arizona. His brother lived in Oregon and they'd barely spoken in years. Who would Gerald trust with everything? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Oh, God, I breathed. I know who it is. Helena leaned forward. Who? But before I could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went white. It's a news alert. Mrs. Fletcher? She turned the phone so I could see the screen. The headline from the Millbrook Gazette made my vision swim. Local woman subject of family concern. Sons seek emergency guardianship of elderly mother. The article was short but devastating. Stephen and Thomas had given an interview. Tearful, concerned sons worried about their aging mother's declining mental state. They spoke of erratic behavior, paranoid accusations, an unhealthy attachment to property that was clearly beyond her ability to manage. They'd even included a photo, me, taken yesterday from a distance, looking wild-eyed and disheveled as I'd emerged from Helena's house after our confrontation. "They're destroying me," I whispered. "In public, where everyone can see." My phone began to buzz with texts. Concerned neighbors, church friends asking if I needed help. Even my sister in Florida. "Aretha, what's going on?" Stephen called me. "Said you're not well. Should I come up there?" My sons had weaponized my entire community against me. Helena gripped my hand. "The witness. You said you know who it is." "Who?" I met her eyes. "Father Paul, the priest who married us. The man who baptized both my boys and heard Gerald's confession every month for 40 years. He's the only person Gerald would have trusted with something this important. But how do we— I'm meeting with my sons at noon. I need you to find Father Paul. He retired last year, but he's still in town, living in the cottage behind St. Mary's. Tell him I sent you." "Tell him—" I hesitated. "Tell him it's time for the truth to come out. All of it." Helena nodded, already reaching for her coat. But as I turned to leave, she caught my arm. "Mrs. Fletcher, wait. There's one more thing." She pulled out a manila envelope, sealed with wax. "Gerald left this with the journal. He wrote on the outside that you should only open it if your sons moved openly against you." She held it out. "I think we're well past that point." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small USB drive. The paper read, "Maria, if you're reading this, then the boys have shown their true colors. I'm so sorry, my love. I'd hoped they'd come to their senses. I'd hoped loving their mother would matter more than money. I was wrong. The USB drive contains everything. Recordings of conversations I had with Stephen and Thomas about their plans, copies of emails they thought they'd deleted, evidence of bribes they paid to the mining company representatives. It's everything you need to stop them. But Maria, and this is important, they have evidence too. Evidence I never told you about. Evidence that could destroy everything if it comes out. The witness knows what I mean. Father Paul will explain. But please, my darling, be prepared. The truth about what I did to protect you is worse than you can imagine. I love you, I'm sorry, and I trust you to make the right choice, whatever that might be. G." The letter fluttered from my numb fingers. What had Gerald done? What secret was so terrible that even now, 3 years after his death, he couldn't write it down? Helena picked up the paper, reading it quickly. Her face went pale. What could be worse than what we already know? I thought about Gerald's final months, the way he'd disappeared for hours at a time, the mysterious phone calls he'd taken in his workshop, the locked boxes and hidden documents. I'd thought he was simply preparing for death, putting his affairs in order. But what if it had been something else? Something darker? The clock on Helena's wall showed 10:30. I had 90 minutes before I had to face my sons. 90 minutes to decide how much to reveal, how hard to push back. And somewhere in town, Father Paul held the answers that could either save me or destroy me. "Go," I told Helena. "Find him. Get the documents. I'll stall my sons as long as I can." She grabbed her keys and ran for the door, but paused on the threshold. "Mrs. Fletcher, Aretha, what if the truth is something you don't want to know?" I thought about that morning 50 years ago when I'd married Gerald, young and hopeful and certain that love was enough. I thought about all the years since, the life we'd built together, the family we'd created. And I thought about the man who'd spent his final years building me a valley of flowers because he knew, he'd always known, that someday I'd need a place to grow beautiful things in the midst of terrible truths. "Then I'll face it anyway," I said, "because that's what Gerald taught me. You don't run from hard things. You walk toward them with your eyes open." Helena nodded and disappeared into the morning. I stood alone in her kitchen, holding a USB drive that contained evidence against my sons and secrets about my husband, and I realized something profound. Gerald hadn't just been protecting me from Thomas and Stephen. He'd been protecting me from himself. And whatever he'd done, whatever sin he'd committed in the name of love, I was about to discover it in the worst possible way, sitting across from my sons in a public diner while they tried to have me declared insane. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Stephen. "Looking forward to lunch, Mom. Time to put this behind us." I stared at the message and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. My sons thought they were hunting me. They thought they had me cornered, frightened, easy to manipulate. They had no idea that their prey had just become a predator. I slipped the USB drive into my purse, locked Helena's house behind me, and drove toward town. The real game was about to begin, and this time, I was playing to win. The Millbrook Diner was packed with the usual lunch crowd: farmers, shopkeepers, retirees nursing coffee and sharing gossip. Every head turned when I walked in. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted, became quieter, more furtive. I felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their pity. My sons had already poisoned the well. Stephen and Thomas sat in a booth at the back, looking like successful professionals slumming in their hometown. Expensive suits, designer watches, the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want. They stood when they saw me, performing concern for the audience around us. "Mom." Stephen pulled me into a hug that felt like a stranglehold. "Thank you for coming. We were worried you might not show." "Why wouldn't I?" I slid into the booth across from them, keeping my purse close. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. "You said you wanted to talk." Thomas signaled the waitress, Betty Armstrong, whose son I'd tutored in reading 20 years ago. She approached with obvious reluctance, her eyes full of questions she didn't dare ask. "Just coffee for me," I said before anyone could order for me. "Black, no sugar." "She'll have the soup too," Stephen added smoothly. "Mom, you need to eat. You're looking thin." Every gesture calculated, every word designed to reinforce the narrative. Poor, declining mother who couldn't even remember to feed herself. "I'll decide what I eat, Stephen." I kept my voice pleasant but firm. "Now, what did you want to discuss?" The brothers exchanged a glance, their old childhood signal that they'd rehearsed this conversation. Thomas pulled out a leather folder, opening it to reveal neatly organized documents. "We've been doing some research," he began, his lawyer voice in full effect, "about the arrangement Dad made with Helena Morrison. And Mom, we have some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "Legal ones, ethical ones." Stephen leaned forward, his expression earnest. Dad was dying. He was on heavy pain medication. His judgment was impaired. And this Helena woman, we've looked into her background. She has a history of financial trouble, failed business ventures, a messy divorce. What does her past have to do with anything? "Everything," Thomas said, "because Dad put her in control of valuable property that should have been part of his estate. Property that legally should have passed to you and eventually to us. We think he was manipulated. We think she took advantage of a dying man." The audacity was breathtaking. They were trying to flip the script, make Helena the villain, Gerald the victim. "Your father was perfectly lucid until the day he died," I said quietly. "And Helena didn't manipulate anyone. Your father sought her out, paid her, trusted her, with your inheritance," Stephen said. "Mom, don't you see? He gave away what should have been yours, what should have kept you secure." "And for what? Some sentimental flower farm that will drain your savings to maintain?" Betty appeared with coffee, setting it down with shaking hands. I could see her listening, absorbing every word, ready to report back to the entire town. My sons knew it too. This wasn't just a family conversation. It was theater. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing," I said. "He was protecting something that mattered to him, to us." "From what?" Thomas's voice rose slightly. "From his own family? From the people who loved him?" The conversations around us had stopped now. Everyone was listening, waiting to see how the crazy old woman would respond. I took a sip of coffee, buying time. Through the diner window, I could see the church steeple in the distance. Was Helena there yet? Had she found Father Paul? Did he still have the documents? Or had 3 years been too long? Dad was protecting me from making a mistake, I said finally. From being pressured into something I didn't want. "Like what?" Stephen spread his hands. Mom, we're not pressuring you. We're trying to help you understand your options. That land, the Morrison property, the valley, all of it, it's sitting on rare earth minerals worth millions. Millions. You could sell, live comfortably for the rest of your life, never worry about money again. I don't worry about money now. But you will. Thomas pulled out more papers. We've done the calculations. The property taxes alone will eat through Dad's life insurance within 5 years. Add maintenance costs, utilities for that cabin, paying staff to maintain the gardens. You'll be broke by the time you're 75. Then I'll figure it out. How? Stephen's patience was fraying. You're 70 years old. You have no income, no job skills, no way to generate revenue from a flower farm that produces nothing but sentiment. I'll manage. With what? Good intentions? Thomas leaned back, his expression hardening. Mom, we've tried being gentle about this. We've tried respecting your feelings. But you're not thinking clearly. You're not seeing the reality of your situation. And there it was. The real message. You're incompetent. You're irrational. You can't be trusted to make your own decisions. I set down my coffee cup carefully. I see reality just fine, Thomas. What I'm not seeing is why my own sons are so desperate to sell land that isn't theirs to sell. It should be ours, Stephen said bluntly. Dad's estate should have been split evenly. That's how inheritance works. Instead, he gave away millions to a stranger and left you with a burden you can't handle. So this is about money. Not concern for me. Not protecting Dad's legacy. Just money. Money is important, Thomas shot back. Money means security, independence, options. And you're sitting on a fortune while living like a widow on a fixed income. It's insane. The word hung in the air like smoke. Around us, I heard whispers. Saw sympathetic looks directed at my sons. Poor boys, trying so hard to help their stubborn, irrational mother. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Helena. Found him. Reading documents now. Call when you can. Relief washed through me, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm not selling. Not to you, not to anyone. That's final. Stephen pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before sliding it across the table. Then maybe this will change your mind. It was a video. Security camera footage from somewhere I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed 3 weeks ago. The scene showed Gerald, my Gerald, who'd been dead for 3 years. No, that wasn't right. I looked closer. It wasn't Gerald. It was someone who looked like him from behind. Someone wearing his favorite jacket, walking with his gait. What is this? I asked, my throat tight. That's Helena's ex-husband, Thomas said. Michael Morrison, recorded 3 weeks before Dad died. That's him wearing Dad's jacket, walking through the Morrison property, marking boundaries for the farm. My head spun. I don't understand. Dad didn't build that farm, Mom. Helena's ex-husband did. They planned the whole thing together. The trust, the fake mineral survey, everything. They were scamming Dad, and now they're scamming you. That's impossible. We have bank records. Stephen pulled out more papers. Payments from Dad to Michael Morrison. $50,000, transferred 6 months before Dad died. Then another $25,000 2 months later. Dad was paying Michael to build the farm and Helena to pretend it was all Dad's idea. The diner was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to make sense of what they were saying. Gerald had lied? The farm wasn't his creation? Helena had been running a con? No, it didn't make sense. I'd read Gerald's journal, seen his handwriting, his love, his desperate need to protect me. Unless the journal was fake, too. I can see you're confused, Thomas said, his voice gentler now. It's okay, Mom. You've been through a lot. This whole situation has been designed to manipulate you, to make you doubt yourself. But we're going to fix it. He pulled out another document, official-looking, stamped and notarized. This is a voluntary guardianship agreement. It gives Stephen and me temporary legal authority to manage your affairs while we sort out this mess. It's just temporary, just until we can get the trust invalidated and recover Dad's money. Then everything goes back to normal. You want me to sign over control of my life? We want to protect you, Stephen corrected. From people who are taking advantage of you. From making decisions that will leave you destitute. I stared at the document, my vision blurring. Everything I'd thought I knew was crumbling. Gerald's love letter, the Valley of Flowers, the trust he'd built to protect me. What if it was all a lie? What if Helena had been playing me from the beginning? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Helena. Mrs. Fletcher, don't believe whatever they're telling you. Father Paul has proof, real proof. Gerald's video testimony. Get out of there now. Video testimony. Gerald's actual voice, his actual words. I looked up at my sons, at their carefully concerned expressions, their rehearsed body language, and I saw it, the tiny crack in Stephen's facade, the momentary flash of triumph in Thomas's eyes. They thought they had me, thought I was weak enough, confused enough to simply surrender. No, I said softly. Stephen blinked. Mom, you're not thinking. I'm thinking very clearly. I stood, gathering my purse. I'm thinking you're both liars. I'm thinking this video is either fabricated or deliberately misleading, and I'm thinking you've underestimated me for the last time. Sit down. Thomas's voice had gone hard. We're not done here. Yes, we are. Betty appeared nervously. Mrs. Fletcher, there are some men outside. They say they need to speak with you. Through the window, I saw a black sedan parked at the curb. 2 men in suits stood beside it, looking official and implacable. Who are they? I asked, though I already knew. Process servers, Stephen said calmly. We filed for emergency guardianship this morning. Those men are here to serve you with the court order. As of right now, pending the hearing next week, your financial accounts are frozen. You can't sell property, can't make major purchases, can't make any legal decisions without our approval. The diner had gone completely silent. Every eye was on me, watching to see how the crazy old woman would react to being publicly stripped of her rights. You can't do this, I whispered. We already have. Thomas stood, buttoning his suit jacket. The judge reviewed our evidence, the wellness checks, the psychiatric evaluations we've scheduled, testimony from concerned neighbors. He agreed you pose a danger to yourself through financial mismanagement. This is kidnapping. This is us protecting our mother, Stephen said loudly, playing to the audience. Even when she doesn't understand, that's what we're doing. The process servers entered the diner, documents in hand. I felt the walls closing in, felt the trap my sons had spent weeks constructing snap shut around me. But I had one card left to play. Father Paul, I said clearly. I invoke sanctuary at St. Mary's Church under canon law. I am being persecuted by my family, and I claim the protection of the church. It was archaic, probably not legally binding, but it stopped everyone cold. Canon law hadn't been invoked in Millbrook in living memory. Stephen's face flushed red. You can't be serious? Father Paul knows everything. Gerald told him everything. And if you try to stop me from reaching him, if you try to serve me with those papers before I've spoken to my priest, I will make such a scene that every newspaper in Pennsylvania will hear about it. I pushed past the process servers, past my sons, past the gaping crowd. Outside, I ran, actually ran, despite my 70-year-old knees, down Main Street toward the white steeple of St. Mary's. Behind me, I heard Stephen shouting, heard footsteps pounding the pavement. But I had a head start and a lifetime of knowing these streets. I burst through the church doors, gasping for breath. Helena sat in a front pew next to Father Paul, a box of documents spread between them. The old priest looked up, his weathered face creased with concern. Aretha, he said gently. Gerald said you'd come. He said when everything fell apart, you'd remember that faith was stronger than fear. I collapsed into the pew beside them, my heart hammering. They're right behind me. They have court orders. They're trying to take everything. I know. Father Paul lifted a DVD case from the box. But Gerald knew too. He prepared for this exact moment. He made this 3 days before he died, knowing his sons would eventually show their true nature. He stood moving to the small television in the corner, kept for youth group movie nights. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly Gerald was there, sitting in this very church, looking gaunt but clear-eyed. Maria, his recorded voice said. and I felt tears stream down my face. If you're watching this, then my boys have done what I feared most. They've tried to take your freedom, your dignity, your choices, and I'm so sorry. The church doors slammed open. Stephen and Thomas stood in the doorway, breathing hard, the process servers behind them. But Father Paul raised his hand. You are in the house of God. Whatever business you have here will be conducted with respect. On the screen, Gerald continued speaking, and his next words made my sons freeze. What I'm about to reveal will change everything. About me, about the farm, about why I really built that valley. He paused, his eyes full of love and regret. Maria, I didn't just protect you from our sons. I protected all of you from the truth about what I did, what I was, who I really worked for all those years. My blood turned to ice. The mineral rights the boys are chasing? They're real, but they were never meant to be found. They were hidden deliberately by people far more dangerous than a Chinese mining company. And I was the one who helped hide them. Gerald's image flickered, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I was never just a farmer, Maria. I was a federal witness. And everything, our life, our farm, our boys' futures, it was all built on a lie I've been running from for 50 years. Part 5, the climax. The silence in the church was absolute. Even the process servers had gone still, their legal documents hanging forgotten in their hands. On the screen, Gerald's gaunt face filled with an emotion I'd only seen once before, the day he told me he was dying. Fear. Maria, in 1975, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. I was working construction in Pittsburgh, just a kid trying to make rent. We were building a warehouse for what I thought was a legitimate shipping company. But one night I stayed late to finish some welding, and I saw them, men in suits, moving crates marked as machine parts. Only they weren't machine parts. Gerald's hands trembled as he adjusted something off screen. When he continued, his voice was barely audible. They were weapons, military-grade weapons being sold to groups the government had embargoed. I saw serial numbers, saw manifests, saw enough to know that what I'd stumbled into was treason on a massive scale. Stephen took a step forward, his face pale. Dad, what? Shut up and listen, Father Paul said sharply. You wanted the truth. Now you're getting it. On screen, Gerald pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age, showing a younger version of himself standing beside a man in a federal agent's badge. I went to the FBI the next day, told them everything. They said I'd done the right thing, that I'd be protected, that the people I'd seen would be brought to justice. What they didn't tell me was that those people had connections everywhere, in law enforcement, in government, in places so high up that even the FBI couldn't guarantee my safety. He paused, wiping his eyes. 3 weeks after I testified before the grand jury, my apartment was firebombed. The FBI pulled me out of Pittsburgh in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. They gave me a new name, new papers, and enough money to disappear. They told me to go somewhere rural, somewhere I could blend in, and never contact my old life again. I felt the room spinning. That's why, I whispered. That's why you never talked about your past. Why we never visited Pittsburgh. Why you had no photos from before we met. I came to Millbrook because it was small and isolated, and no one asked questions about a young man with construction skills and cash to buy property. I met you 6 months later, and Maria, I fell so hard so fast that I convinced myself it would be okay, that I could have a normal life, a family, that the people I'd testified against would eventually go to prison or die or forget about me. Thomas's voice cracked. You lied to us. Our entire lives. Everything we thought we knew was real, Gerald said firmly, as if he could hear his son's objection through time. My love for your mother was real. My love for you boys was real. The farm, the life we built, that was all real. The only lie was my name and where I came from. He pulled out another document, holding it close to the camera. But 5 years ago, everything changed. Frank Morrison, Helena's grandfather, called me to his deathbed, told me he'd been doing geological surveys on his property and found something. Rare earth minerals worth millions. He wanted to bring in mining companies, wanted to develop the land. And that's when I realized the danger. Gerald's face hardened. Those minerals? They weren't just valuable. They were the exact type needed for military applications, advanced guidance systems, weapons manufacturing. If Frank's surveys became public, if mining companies started digging, the kind of people who'd tried to kill me 50 years ago would come looking, because they'd want to control that resource, and they'd want to make sure no one from their past could connect them to their current operations. My hands were shaking. So you stopped him? I convinced Frank the surveys were wrong, paid for a fake assessment that showed the minerals were in the wrong location, shifted them from the Morrison property to the valley land that connected our properties. Then I bought that land from Frank's estate after he died, put it in Helena's name to keep it out of probate, and made sure no legitimate mining could ever happen there. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes intense. The real minerals are still under the Morrison farmhouse, exactly where Frank found them. But as long as everyone believes they're under the valley, no one will dig in the right place, no one will find what's really there, and no one will connect those minerals to the weapons trafficking case from 1975. Jesus Christ, Stephen breathed. You buried a fortune to protect yourself. I buried a fortune to protect all of you, Gerald corrected, his recorded voice sharp. Because if those people ever found out where I was, if they ever traced me to Millbrook, they wouldn't just kill me. They'd kill everyone who could testify about the connection. My wife, my sons, anyone who might have seen documents or heard stories. The weight of it crashed over me like a wave. Every decision Gerald had made, every secret he'd kept, had been about keeping us alive. The trust I created isn't just about protecting Maria's inheritance, it's about making sure that land never gets developed, never gets surveyed properly, never reveals what's really underneath. Gerald's expression softened. Helena knows the truth. Father Paul knows the truth. And now, Maria, you know it too. He reached toward the camera, his hand trembling. I'm sorry, my love. Sorry for the lies, the secrets, the burden I'm leaving you with. But I trust you to do what I couldn't, to keep our family safe while living in the light. Father Paul has evidence, real geological surveys, documents from the original case, names of people who are still alive and still dangerous. Use it wisely. Use it to protect yourself from our boys if you have to. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thomas made a sound. Half laugh, half sob. This is insane. Dad was paranoid. Dying and paranoid and making up stories. It's not a story. Father Paul opened the document box, pulling out file after file. I have the FBI reports, the witness protection papers, the original geological surveys Frank Morrison commissioned. Everything Gerald told you is documented and verified. He spread the papers across the pew, and I saw Stephen's face change as he recognized official federal letterhead, case numbers, photographs of men in handcuffs being led into courtrooms. The names in that trafficking ring? Father Paul continued quietly. 3 are dead. 4 are in prison. 2 are still at large, still powerful, still looking for loose ends to tie up. If they ever discovered Gerald Fletcher was really David Kowalski, the witness who brought down their operation in 1975, this entire family would be in danger. Why are you telling them this? I asked, my voice hollow. Why let them know? Because they need to understand what they've done. Father Paul turned to my sons, and his expression was harder than I'd ever seen. You've been running around town for weeks, shouting about mineral rights and mining companies, filing legal documents that put your mother's name in public records, attracting exactly the kind of attention your father spent 50 years trying to avoid. Stephen had gone white. We didn't know. You didn't care to know. You saw money and you chased it without thinking about consequences. Father Paul pulled out another document. This came 2 days ago. A request from a Philadelphia law firm representing an unnamed mining interest. They want to purchase the Morrison property and the Valley land. They're offering $5 million. No inspection necessary. That's good, Thomas said weakly. That's a trap. Helena spoke for the first time, her voice shaking. Anonymous buyers offering premium prices for uninspected land? That's not a legitimate business transaction. That's someone trying to get control of the property fast, before anyone can look too closely at who they really are. I looked at the document, at the law firm's name, and felt ice settle in my stomach. They know. Somehow, they know Gerald is dead and they're making their move. Because you boys couldn't keep your mouths shut. Father Paul's voice was withering. You've been talking to lawyers, mining companies, consultants. Do you think word doesn't travel? Do you think people don't notice when small-town sons suddenly start pushing to develop land their father spent years protecting? We'll fix it. Stephen was pacing now, his confident mask completely shattered. We'll withdraw the guardianship petition. We'll stop talking to mining companies. You'll do exactly what your mother tells you to do, Father Paul interrupted. Because she's the only one who has any right to make decisions about this property. And more importantly, she's the only one who seems to understand what's really at stake. He turned to me, his old eyes full of compassion. Aretha, Gerald left you a choice. You can sell the land to these anonymous buyers. Walk away wealthy but knowing you've potentially armed dangerous people. You can keep the land and continue the deception, protecting the secret but living with the burden. Or you can go public, tell the FBI everything, let them investigate, and hope that 50 years is enough time for the danger to have passed. What did Gerald want me to do? He wanted you to live, whatever that required. Father Paul handed me a sealed envelope. This is his final letter, the one he wrote the day before he died. He told me to give it to you only after you'd heard everything, after you understood the full weight of what he'd been carrying. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside, Gerald's handwriting was shaky but clear. My dearest Maria, if you're reading this, then you know the truth about me, about us, about the life I stole for us. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I hope you can understand that every lie I told was in service of the only truth that mattered, that I loved you more than life itself, that our boys, our farm, our simple, beautiful life together was worth any deception. You're the strongest person I've ever known, even though you never believed it. You survived losing your parents young. You survived raising 2 difficult sons mostly alone because I was always working, really just hiding. You survived my death with grace and dignity. Now I'm asking you to survive this final test. The boys will fight you. They'll hurt you. They'll try to take everything because they're my sons and I taught them too well to be survivors themselves. But you're their mother, and you taught them something I couldn't. How to love. Trust that love. Trust that underneath the greed and anger, there are still the boys who brought you dandelions and built you Mother's Day cards. Trust that they can change, even if I never could. And Maria, trust yourself. You don't need my protection anymore. You never really did. All my love, forever. Gerald. P.S. The lavender in the valley? I planted them in the shape of our wedding date if you look from above, in case you ever doubted that every flower was chosen with love. Tears streamed down my face as I folded the letter carefully. When I looked up, my sons were watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Shock, grief, confusion, maybe underneath it all, shame. Mom, Thomas said softly, we didn't know. We never didn't know or didn't ask. My voice was steady despite the tears. Your father built you both safety and security. He gave you educations and opportunities and love. And you repaid him by trying to destroy the one thing he asked you to protect. Me. We thought we were helping. You thought you were inheriting. I stood, facing them across the pews. You thought you deserved his assets because you were his sons. But Gerald didn't leave you the land because he knew you'd sell it. He knew you'd chase profit over safety. He knew you'd become exactly what you've become. Stephen's face crumpled. That's not fair. We loved Dad. Then prove it. I held up the anonymous buyer's offer. This firm, these people who want to buy the land, withdraw your guardianship petition. Help me investigate who they really are. Help me protect what your father died protecting. The brothers looked at each other, and I saw something pass between them. The same silent communication they'd had since childhood, but different now, weighted with new understanding. And if we don't? Thomas asked quietly. I pulled the USB drive from my purse, the one Gerald had left with the journal. Then I released this. Recordings of every conversation you've had about exploiting me. Every bribe you've paid to doctors and lawyers, every lie you've told to build your case against me. I'll send it to every newspaper in Pennsylvania. I'll make sure your clients, your colleagues, everyone you've ever worked with knows what you tried to do to your own mother. You wouldn't, Stephen breathed. Try me. I met his eyes. I am 70 years old. I have buried one husband, survived one secret identity, and uncovered one decades-long conspiracy. Do you really think I'm afraid of embarrassing my children? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Stephen pulled out his phone. I'll call the lawyer. Tell him to withdraw the petition. And I'll contact the mining consultants, Thomas added. Tell them we're no longer interested in selling. Good. I turned to Father Paul. I need copies of everything. The FBI documents, the surveys, the witness protection papers. And I need a lawyer. Not my son's lawyers. Someone who specializes in estate law and federal protection programs. I know someone, Helena said. My divorce attorney. She's tough, discreet, and she owes me a favor. The process servers were backing toward the door, clearly wanting no part of whatever family drama they'd stumbled into. I let them go without a word. Father Paul began packing up the documents, but he paused, looking at me with something like pride. Gerald was right about you. You're stronger than any of us gave you credit for. I had a good teacher. I touched the letter in my pocket. He just didn't realize he was teaching me until it was too late. Outside, the October sun was setting, painting the church windows gold and crimson. My sons stood awkwardly by the door, no longer sure of their place in this family, this story, this life that had turned out to be built on foundations more complex than any of us had imagined. There's one more thing, I said, and they both turned. Tomorrow morning, we're all going to the valley. All of us. And you're going to help me prepare those gardens for winter. You're going to learn the names of every plant your father chose. You're going to understand why lavender and roses and gardenias mattered. Mom, we have work, Stephen began. Cancel it. Your father spent 3 years building me a place of beauty in the middle of all this ugliness. The least you can do is spend one day honoring that. They nodded, chastened, and left without another word. Helena touched my shoulder gently. What you did just now, standing up to them like that, Gerald would be so proud. Gerald made me a victim by keeping secrets. I'm choosing not to stay one. I looked at Father Paul. Can the church help? If those people come looking, if they figure out who Gerald really was, the church can offer sanctuary. But Aretha, you need to understand. Once you step outside these doors, you're in uncharted territory. The guardianship threat is over, but the danger your husband warned about? That's very real. I thought about the anonymous buyers, about men in suits moving weapons 50 years ago, about all the ways power corrupted and secrets multiplied. And I thought about Gerald, young and scared, choosing love over safety, choosing to build a life even when he knew it was built on sand. Then I'll walk carefully, I said, but I'll walk forward. That's what Gerald taught me in the end. You don't run from hard things, even when they might kill you? Helena asked softly. I smiled, though it felt fragile as frost. Especially then. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost covering the valley like a whispered blessing. I arrived early, before my sons, before Helena, before anyone could see me stand alone among the lavender rows and try to make sense of everything I'd learned. Gerald had planted these flowers in the shape of our wedding date. I couldn't see it from the ground, but I trusted it was there. One more secret revealed, one more proof that even his deceptions had been acts of love. I heard cars on the gravel road and turned to see both my sons' vehicles pulling up to the gate. They emerged slowly, dressed in jeans and work shirts instead of their usual suits, looking uncertain and young despite their graying hair and expensive watches. Mom, Stephen said quietly, we're here. I can see that. I handed them each a pair of work gloves. The roses need pruning. The lavender needs to be cut back for winter. The gardenias need protection from frost. Your father did this every October for 3 years while he was dying. The least we can do is honor that. We worked in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the snip of pruning shears and the rustle of autumn leaves. I watched my sons fumble with the plants, saw them squint at the instruction sheets I'd prepared, saw them slowly begin to understand the meticulous care Gerald had put into every square foot of this place. Thomas was the first to break. "Mom, about yesterday." "Not yet." I didn't look up from the rose bush I was tending. "First you work, then we talk." By noon, we'd cleared 3 rows of lavender and pruned 24 rose bushes. My sons had dirt under their fingernails and sweat on their brows, and they looked more like the boys I'd raised than they had in years. Helena arrived with lunch, sandwiches and thermoses of soup, her way of building bridges. We sat on the cabin porch, eating in the weak October sunshine, and I let the silence stretch until it became bearable instead of painful. "Your father," I began finally, "spent his whole life protecting you from truths you weren't ready to handle. He lied about his past to keep you safe. He hid assets to ensure you'd be provided for. He built this place so I'd have something beautiful after he was gone." I looked at each of them in turn, "And you repaid that by trying to take away my autonomy, my choices, my dignity. We know." Stephen's voice was rough. "We know, and there's no excuse. We saw dollar signs and convinced ourselves we were being practical, being smart. But really, we were just being greedy." "You were being scared," I corrected. "Scared of your own mortality, your own financial futures. Scared that maybe you hadn't earned everything you have. Your father understood that fear. It's why he forgave you in advance." Thomas wiped his eyes. "How can you forgive us? After everything we tried to do, I haven't decided if I forgive you yet," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to see if you can earn it. Starting with helping me figure out who those anonymous buyers really are." Helena pulled out her laptop, balancing it on her knees. "I've been digging. The law firm that made the offer? It's a shell company, registered in Delaware 6 months ago. But the partner who signed the letter has an interesting history." She turned the screen so we could see. "Richard Freeman. Formerly worked for the Department of Defense. Before that, he was an associate at a firm that represented several defendants in arms trafficking cases in the 1970s. My blood ran cold. They know. They've always known. Or they've been watching," Stephen said, his lawyer's mind engaging. "Waiting for Gerald to die so they could make their move without risking exposure. Mom, if these people are who we think they are, then we can't fight them alone." I pulled out my phone. Father Paul gave me a number, a contact at the FBI who worked on witness protection cases. It's time to stop hiding and start asking for help. The call took 3 days to arrange. In that time, my sons moved into the farmhouse with me, sleeping in their old childhood rooms, standing watch in shifts, even though we had no real evidence of danger beyond our own paranoia. Thomas contacted a security company and had cameras installed. Stephen compiled every document we had into a comprehensive file. And every morning, we walked to the valley together and tended Gerald's gardens. I watched them learn the difference between lavender varieties, saw them carefully stake the roses against winter storms, heard them argue about the best way to protect the gardenias. They were learning, slowly, to care for something that wouldn't make them money, to value beauty for its own sake. On the 4th day, Agent Ruby Freeman, no relation to Richard Freeman, she assured us immediately, arrived in an unmarked sedan. She was younger than I'd expected, barely 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of Gerald. We sat in my kitchen, the same table where this had all begun, and I told her everything. She recorded it all, asked clarifying questions, took notes in a leather portfolio that looked older than she was. When I finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm going to be honest with you. The case your husband testified in was closed decades ago. Most of the principals are dead or in prison. But," she hesitated, "there were always rumors. Questions about whether we'd caught everyone, whether some of the higher-level players had escaped." "Richard Freeman?" Stephen asked. "Is a person of interest, has been for years. But he's smart, connected, and we've never been able to prove anything." Agent Freeman tapped her pen against her portfolio. "If he's making a move on this property, it's because he believes something valuable is here. Something worth risking exposure for." "The minerals," Thomas said. "They're real. They're just not where everyone thinks they are. Agent Freeman's eyes sharpened. Explain. Helena pulled out Frank Morrison's original survey, the real one. My grandfather found rare earth deposits under the Morrison farmhouse. Gerald Fletcher deliberately falsified later surveys to show the deposits under the valley land instead. He wanted to protect his family by making sure no one dug in the right place. And now Richard Freeman wants to buy both properties, I added. The valley and the farmhouse. He's offering premium prices with no inspection because he already knows what's there. Or thinks he does. Agent Freeman was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps, the surveys, the decades-old documents. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Fletcher, I can offer you federal protection. We can relocate you, give you a new identity. No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. I'm 70 years old. I've lived in this town my entire adult life. My husband spent 50 years running, and it killed him. Maybe not directly, but all that stress, all that fear, it wore him down. I'm done running. Then what do you want? I thought about Gerald's letter, about his hope that I could be stronger than he was, about the valley he'd built and the life he'd given me and the choice he'd left in my hands. I want to sell them the land, I said quietly. Everyone started talking at once, Stephen objecting, Thomas arguing, Helena looking betrayed. But Agent Freeman held up her hand, her eyes never leaving mine. Tell me your plan, she said. We sell them the valley. The land everyone thinks has the minerals. We make the transaction clean and legal and documented. And when they start digging in the wrong place, when they don't find what they're looking for, they'll have to show their hand. They'll have to explain why they knew there should be minerals there, why they were so eager to buy uninspected land. And then we have them. Agent Freeman was smiling now. They expose themselves trying to find resources that aren't there. Meanwhile, the real deposits stay hidden under the Morrison farmhouse, which you're not selling. Which I'm donating, Helena corrected, to a conservation trust. Today, before any sale goes through. The farmhouse and surrounding land become protected historical property. Can't be developed, can't be mined, can't be touched. Stephen was shaking his head. You're talking about giving up millions of dollars. We're talking about ending a 50-year-old threat, I interrupted. Your father's life was stolen by fear and secrecy. I won't let his death be meaningless. If selling the valley means catching the people who made him run, then it's worth any price. Thomas looked at his brother, and I saw something pass between them. The same silent communication, but transformed now by understanding. What do you need from us? Thomas asked quietly. I need you to trust me. Support me. Stop trying to control me. I looked at both of them. I need you to remember that I'm your mother, not your investment portfolio. We can do that, Stephen said. And for the first time in months, I believed him. The sale took 2 weeks to finalize. Richard Freeman's firm was eager, suspiciously eager, agreeing to every term without negotiation. Agent Freeman had the entire transaction wired, literally. Every conversation recorded, every document traced, every dollar followed back to its source. The day the deal closed, I stood in the valley one last time before the buyers took possession. My sons stood with me, and Helena and Father Paul, who'd come to offer a blessing. You know they'll tear this apart, Thomas said quietly. As soon as they start looking for minerals that aren't here, all of Dad's work will be destroyed. Your father's work wasn't the plants, I said. It was the love he put into them, and that's already been harvested. I carry it with me. 3 weeks later, Agent Freeman called. We have them. Richard Freeman and 4 associates arrested on charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. When they didn't find the minerals where they expected, they filed insurance claims for geological surveys that were never done. They tried to falsify reports to explain the discrepancy. And in doing so, they connected themselves to the original 1975 weapons trafficking case through documented communications. I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly weak. It's over? It's over. The case is solid. They'll go to prison. And Mrs. Fletcher, your husband's testimony from 1975 was key to establishing the historical pattern. His courage 50 years ago, and your courage now, you've both helped bring dangerous people to justice. After I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the farm Gerald and I had built together. The real farm. Not the valley with its lavender and roses, but this place. The house where we'd raised our boys. The fields we'd worked together. The life we'd lived that was both a lie and the most profound truth I'd ever known. My sons found me there an hour later, still standing at the window. "Mom?" Stephen asked. "The FBI called us too. Told us it's over. You did it." "We did it," I corrected. "All of us. Your father set it in motion, I kept it going, and you two finally learned what really matters." "Which is?" Thomas asked. "Family. Not the easy parts. Not Sunday dinners and birthday cards. But the hard parts. The choosing each other even when it costs something. The protecting each other even when it's difficult. The forgiving each other even when it hurts." I turned to face them. These men who were my sons and strangers, and finally, hopefully, becoming something better than either. Your father left me a valley of flowers, but the real gift was teaching me that I was stronger than I knew, that I could face terrible truths and make hard choices and come out the other side still standing. I touched each of their faces, like I had when they were small. Now I'm teaching you the same thing. You can be better than your worst choices. You can choose love over money. You can honor your father's memory by becoming the men he hoped you'd be. Stephen pulled me into a hug, and then Thomas joined, and we stood there in the kitchen where Gerald had left his final secret, holding each other while October sunlight painted the walls gold. Later that evening, Helena arrived with news that the Conservation Trust had been finalized. The Morrison farmhouse and its land were protected in perpetuity. The minerals beneath it would stay buried, safe from exploitation, a secret the earth would keep. "Your husband was smarter than any of us," she said, accepting a cup of tea. "He knew exactly what he was doing. Protecting you, protecting the land, protecting a secret that could have destroyed everything. He was a good man who made hard choices," I agreed. "And in the end, those choices saved us all." That night, I took Gerald's letter and his journal and the USB drive, all the evidence of his secret life, and I burned them in the fireplace. I'd memorized the important parts. The rest was just paper and pain, and I was done carrying both. The fire burned bright and clean, turning secrets into smoke, lies into ash. And when it was done, I went to bed in the house I'd shared with Gerald for 50 years, in the town where I'd lived as Aretha Fletcher, wife of Gerald Fletcher the farmer. But now I knew the truth. I was Aretha Fletcher, wife of David Kowalski the hero, the man who'd risked everything to do the right thing, the man who'd loved me enough to build me a garden of lies that bloomed with truth. 6 months later, the valley began to grow wild. Without maintenance, without Gerald's careful tending, it returned to forest and meadow. The lavender faded, the roses grew unpruned, the gardenias surrendered to frost. But in my garden at the farmhouse, I planted new flowers, lavender and roses and gardenias, chosen not for sentiment but for beauty. And my sons helped me plant them, their hands in the soil beside mine, learning finally to grow something that wouldn't make them rich, but might make them whole. "Do you miss the valley?" Thomas asked one spring morning, watching new shoots emerge. "I miss what it represented," I admitted. "But I don't need a grand gesture anymore. This is enough." I gestured to the simple garden we'd made together. "This is real." And it was. The old farmhouse settled into its foundation, secure and paid for. My sons visited every Sunday, sometimes bringing their own children, teaching them about their grandfather's courage and their grandmother's strength. Helena moved into the Morrison farmhouse, turning it into an artist's retreat, painting landscapes that captured the rolling Pennsylvania hills without revealing the treasure buried beneath. And I lived, fully and freely and without fear for the first time since I'd found that brass key on my 70th birthday, because Gerald had been right about one thing. Age wasn't weakness. It was wisdom earned through surviving everything life threw at you and coming out the other side still able to love. I was 70 years old. I'd buried a husband, uncovered a conspiracy, faced down my own children, and helped bring criminals to justice. I was 70 years old, and I was just getting started. Every October on my birthday, I walked to where the valley used to be. The fence was gone now, torn down by the government after the arrests. The cabin had been demolished. The irrigation system was silent and dry, but if you looked carefully, you could still see the shape of the lavender rose, faint lines in the wild grass where Gerald's careful planning had left its mark. And from above, from the hill where I stood each year, you could still see it. 6/15/1975. Our wedding date, traced in the earth, visible only to those who knew to look for it. One final secret, one last proof of love. I stood there in the cold October wind, 76 years old and alive and free, and I whispered to the man who'd given me everything by taking nothing for himself. Thank you, Gerald, for the lies and the truth, for the fear and the courage, for building me a place to grow when you knew you wouldn't be there to see it bloom. The wind carried my words away, scattering them like seeds across the valley that was and wasn't, the garden that had been real and false, and somehow both at once. And I turned for home, knowing that the best memorial to Gerald's love wasn't preserving what he'd built, but having the courage to let it go, to grow something new, to live without secrets, in the light, surrounded by family who finally understood what he'd known all along. That love isn't about grand gestures or hidden treasures. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And as I walked back to the farmhouse where my sons were waiting with birthday cake and awkward affection, I carried with me the greatest gift Gerald had ever given me, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, even, especially, the truth. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.